Listen carefully, because this isn't loud, it isn't obvious, and it doesn't come with warning signs. The real test doesn't happen in arguments, drama, or emotional conversations. It happens in silence. And most people fail it, not because they're weak, but because they don't even realize they're being tested. This is where attraction is built or quietly destroyed. Silence has a way of revealing what words often hide. When communication slows down or disappears, it creates a space where your emotional habits come to the surface without filters. In that moment, there's no script, no reassurance, no immediate feedback to guide your reactions. What you feel and how you respond becomes raw and unedited. For many, this is where anxiety quietly takes over. Thoughts begin to race, assumptions start forming, and the mind tries to fill in the gaps with worst-case scenarios. A delayed reply suddenly feels personal. A short message feels like distance. And without realizing it, the emotional response becomes stronger than the reality itself. The natural urge is to restore comfort as quickly as possible. That often shows up as double texting, over-explaining, or trying to pull attention back immediately. It feels justified in the moment because the discomfort of silence can be intense. But what's really happening underneath is a lack of emotional control. Instead of observing the situation calmly, the reaction is driven by fear of losing connection. This fear pushes actions that are not grounded in confidence, but in uncertainty. And that shift is subtle yet powerful. The energy changes from composed to reactive, from self-assured to seeking validation. Emotional control in silence is not about pretending you don't care. It's about managing the impulse to act out of insecurity. There's a difference between feeling something and immediately responding to it. When silence appears, it gives you a choice. Either let your emotions dictate your behavior or take a step back and regulate your response. Most people skip that pause. They react first and reflect later, often realizing too late that their reaction created unnecessary tension or revealed more neediness than they intended. The ability to stay grounded during silence shows a deep level of inner stability. It means you don't rely on constant communication to feel secure. You understand that a moment of quiet doesn't define the entire connection. Instead of jumping to conclusions, you allow space for reality to unfold. This kind of mindset doesn't come from ignoring emotions, but from understanding them without being controlled by them. You can notice the urge to reach out, the desire to fix the silence, and still choose not to act impulsively. There's also a level of self-respect involved in this. When you maintain composure, you're signaling to yourself that your value isn't dependent on immediate attention or constant reassurance. You're not abandoning your needs. You're simply not allowing temporary discomfort to override your sense of self. That internal message is far more powerful than any words you could send in a moment of panic. It builds a quiet confidence that others can feel even without direct communication. People who struggle in silence often confuse urgency with importance. They believe that every gap must be filled, every delay must be addressed, but not every moment requires action. Sometimes the strongest position is to do nothing and remain steady. This doesn't weaken connection. It strengthens your presence within it. It shows that you're not easily shaken, not easily thrown off balance by something as simple as a pause in communication. Over time, this level of control changes how you experience relationships. You stop seeing silence as a threat and start seeing it as neutral space. Your thoughts become clearer because they're not clouded by immediate emotional reactions. You begin to respond with intention rather than impulse. And that shift creates a completely different dynamic, one where your actions are aligned with confidence instead of fear. Overchasing often begins in a subtle way. It doesn't feel like desperation at first. It feels like effort, like care, like trying to keep something meaningful alive. When silence appears or attention shifts, the instinct is to close the gap. You send another message, then another. You try to be more engaging, more understanding, more available. In your mind, you're strengthening the connection, but in reality, you may be tipping the balance too far in one direction. Attraction naturally thrives on balance. There's a rhythm to it. Give and take, presence and absence. interest and curiosity. When that rhythm is disrupted by one person consistently giving more, the dynamic starts to change. The person who chases more begins to feel less valued, while the one receiving all the effort may start to feel less urgency. It's not always intentional, but human nature responds to energy. When something feels too available, it can lose its sense of importance. Chasing is often driven by the fear of losing someone. That fear creates a sense of urgency, making every delay feel like a problem that needs fixing. But acting from that place shifts your energy. Instead of expressing genuine interest, you begin seeking reassurance. Instead of enjoying the connection, you start managing it. And that difference is noticeable, even if it's not spoken out loud. The interaction becomes less about mutual interest and more about maintaining attention. There's also a hidden cost to overchasing. When you invest too much without receiving the same level of effort in return, you slowly start to feel drained. You may not notice it immediately, but over time it creates frustration and self-doubt. You begin questioning your worth, wondering why your effort isn't being matched. This is where many people lose themselves. They keep giving more, hoping it will eventually be enough, instead of recognizing the imbalance for what it is. Matching energy doesn't mean playing games or becoming distant for the sake of control. It means staying aligned with the level of effort being given. If someone is consistent, you can be consistent. If they pull back, you don't rush forward to compensate. You allow space for them to show their level of interest without interference. This approach protects your self-respect while also keeping the dynamic natural and balanced. Another important aspect is understand that you cannot force attraction through effort alone. No amount of chasing can create genuine interest if it isn't already there. In fact, too much effort can have the opposite effect. It can make the other person feel overwhelmed or reduce the sense of challenge that often keeps attraction alive. People value what they invest in, not just what is handed to them without effort. Restraint becomes a powerful tool here. It allows you to observe rather than react, to give space rather than fill it. When you resist the urge to chase, you create an opportunity for the other person to step forward. If they do, the connection becomes more balanced. If they don't, you gain clarity without exhausting yourself trying to force something that isn't naturally flowing. There's also confidence in knowing when to step back. It shows that you trust your own value enough not to overextend yourself for attention. You're not withdrawing to manipulate. You're simply choosing not to overgive. That distinction matters because it keeps your actions rooted in self-respect rather than strategy. Over time, this mindset changes how you approach connections. You become more aware of energy, more selective with your effort, and less reactive to temporary shifts in attention. Instead of chasing to hold on to something, you allow things to develop at their own pace. And in that space, the right kind of attention comes naturally, without force or imbalance. Silence has a way of bringing your inner dialogue to the surface. When there are no messages to respond to, no reassurance to hold on to, and no immediate validation coming in, you're left alone with your thoughts. That's where your sense of self-worth becomes clear. It's not what you say about yourself when things are going well. It's what you believe about yourself when nothing is being confirmed from the outside. For many, silence triggers a quiet kind of doubt. Questions begin to form without permission. Did I do something wrong? Why haven't they replied? Are they losing interest? These thoughts don't come from the situation alone. They come from what you already believe deep down. If your self-worth is tied to attention, then any absence of it feels like a loss. And without realizing it, you start measuring your value based on someone else's behavior. This is where the shift happens. Instead of seeing silence as neutral, it starts to feel personal. The mind looks for meaning in every small detail, trying to connect dots that may not even exist. A delayed response becomes a sign of disinterest. A change in tone becomes a signal of rejection. And the more you analyze, the more your emotions follow those assumptions. What began as a simple pause turns into an emotional spiral fueled by insecurity. When your self-worth depends on external validation, You feel the need to fix that discomfort quickly. You might try to be more engaging, more understanding, or more available, hoping it will bring back the attention you feel is slipping. But this approach doesn't come from confidence. It comes from a need to be chosen, to be reassured, to feel secure through someone else's actions. And that need, even when hidden, shapes how you show up. On the other hand, when your self-worth is internally grounded, silence doesn't carry the same weight. It doesn't immediately trigger self-doubt because your sense of value isn't being questioned. You understand that someone else's behavior is not a direct reflection of your worth. People get busy, distracted, or deal with their own thoughts, and not everything revolves around you. This perspective creates emotional stability because you're not constantly interpreting situations through a lens of insecurity. There's also a level of independence that comes with strong self-worth. You don't feel the need to constantly prove yourself or earn attention. You're comfortable knowing that the right connection won't require you to overextend or chase validation. This doesn't mean you become distant or indifferent. It simply means you remain secure within yourself. Regardless of temporary shifts in communication, another important aspect is how you talk to yourself during silence. That inner voice either builds you up or breaks you down. If it's filled with doubt, criticism, or fear, it amplifies the discomfort. But if it's grounded, calm, and self-assured, it keeps you steady. You start to replace assumptions with patience and overthinking with clarity. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you begin to think there could be many reasons and I don't need to jump to conclusions. Over time, this mindset transforms how you experience connections. You stop seeking constant reassurance because you already feel secure. You stop interpreting every pause as a problem because you understand that space is a natural part of any interaction. And most importantly, you stop tying your identity to someone else's level of attention. Your self-worth becomes something stable, something that doesn't rise and fall based on how often someone texts or how quickly they respond. And when that stability is in place, silence loses its power to shake you. It becomes just another moment, not a measure of your value. Patience is one of the rarest forms of strength, especially in moments where uncertainty takes over. When silence appears, the immediate reaction for most people is to do something, anything, to remove that uncomfortable feeling. The mind pushes for action because it wants clarity, reassurance, and control. Waiting feels unnatural because it forces you to sit with the unknown, and the unknown often triggers anxiety. But that's exactly where patience begins to separate emotional discipline from impulsive behavior. The urge to act quickly can be powerful. You might feel like if you don't respond now, reach out now, or fix the situation immediately, you'll lose something important. That urgency creates pressure, and under pressure, people tend to make decisions that are driven more by emotion than by clarity. In those moments, patience feels like doing nothing, like missing an opportunity. But in reality, patience is not passive, it's controlled restraint. It's the decision to pause, observe, and allow things to unfold without forcing an outcome. When you slow down instead of reacting instantly, you give yourself space to think clearly. You're no longer operating from a heightened emotional state, which means your actions become more intentional. You begin to see the situation for what it is, rather than what your fears are telling you it might be. This shift alone can prevent unnecessary misunderstandings, overreactions, or behaviors that you might later regret. It allows you to respond in a way that aligns with your values instead of your impulses. There's also a deeper level of confidence that comes with patience. It shows that you trust yourself enough not to rush. You're not trying to control every moment or force immediate answers. Instead, you understand that clarity often comes with time, not urgency. This mindset creates a sense of calm that is noticeable, even without words. It reflects emotional maturity, the ability to handle discomfort without letting it dictate your behavior. Many people confuse speed with importance. They believe that acting quickly shows interest, effort, or commitment. But not every situation requires an immediate response. In fact, moving too fast can sometimes create imbalance. It can signal that you're more focused on avoiding discomfort than maintaining a healthy dynamic. Patience, on the other hand, keeps things balanced. It allows both sides to contribute naturally without pressure or force. Another important aspect of patience is that it reveals truth over time. When you don't rush to fill the silence, you give the other person space to show their level of interest and intention. You're not interfering with the process by overcompensating or trying to guide the outcome. This clarity is valuable because it shows you what's real, not what you're trying to make real. And that understanding helps you make better decisions moving forward. Patience also protects your emotional energy. Constantly reacting, analyzing, and trying to manage every small shift can be exhausting. It drains your focus and keeps you in a cycle of overthinking. When you choose patience, you step out of that cycle. You conserve your energy for what truly matters instead of spending it on temporary uncertainty. This creates a sense of control, not over the situation itself, but over how you experience it. Over time, patience becomes a habit rather than a forced choice. You become more comfortable with pauses, more accepting of uncertainty, and less driven by the need for immediate answers. Your responses become measured, your thoughts become clearer, and your presence becomes stronger. Instead of reacting to every moment, you move with intention, allowing things to develop naturally without unnecessary pressure. Silence creates a space that most people rush to fill, but that space is exactly where intrigue begins to grow. When everything about you is immediately visible, your thoughts, your feelings, your availability, there's very little left for someone to wonder about. Predictability becomes comfortable, but it also reduces excitement. Mystery, on the other hand, introduces a sense of curiosity that keeps attention alive without force. The instinct to explain everything often comes from a desire to be understood. You want clarity, you want connection, and you don't want to be misinterpreted. So you share more, you clarify more, and you try to remove any uncertainty. But in doing so, you may unintentionally remove the very element that keeps someone engaged. When there's nothing left to discover, the interaction can start to feel routine rather than stimulating. Silence allows you to hold back just enough to maintain that sense of intrigue. It doesn't mean being secretive or playing games. It means not revealing everything all at once. It means letting conversations breathe instead of overloading them with constant communication. When you give space, you allow the other person's mind to engage. They start to think about you, wonder what you're doing, and anticipate your presence instead of taking it for granted. There's a difference between being open and being overexposed. Being open is healthy. It builds trust and connection. But overexposure can happen when you feel the need to constantly share, constantly update, and constantly keep the interaction going. This often comes from discomfort with silence rather than a genuine desire to connect. And when that happens, the interaction becomes less about quality and more about quantity. Mystery naturally increases perceived value because it creates a sense of depth. When not everything is immediately known, there's an assumption that there's more beneath the surface. That depth draws people in. It makes them want to explore, to understand, and to invest their attention. This doesn't require manipulation. It simply requires restraint and awareness of how much you're giving at any given moment. Another important aspect is emotional independence. When you're comfortable with silence, you're not relying on constant interaction to feel connected. You're okay with stepping back, focusing on your own life, and allowing the connection to exist without constant reinforcement. That independence makes your presence feel intentional rather than habitual. When you do engage, it feels meaningful because it's not coming from a place of need. People are naturally drawn to what they can't fully predict. When your behavior is balanced, sometimes present, sometimes focused on your own world, it creates a rhythm that feels dynamic. It keeps the interaction alive because there's always something unfolding rather than everything being laid out at once. This rhythm is what transforms simple communication into something more engaging and memorable. Silence also gives you control over your narrative. Instead of reacting to every moment or explaining every feeling, you choose what to share and when to share it. That control allows you to present yourself in a way that feels grounded and intentional. You're not oversharing out of impulse, and you're not holding back out of fear. You're simply allowing things to develop at a natural pace. Over time, this approach changes how others perceive you. You come across as composed, self-assured, and interesting without trying too hard. Your presence feels valuable because it's not constant, and your attention feels meaningful because it's not given out of habit. The space you allow becomes part of your presence, adding a layer of depth that keeps people engaged without the need for constant effort. Detachment is often misunderstood because people confuse it with indifference or a lack of care. In reality, true detachment is not about shutting off emotions. It's about not being controlled by them. It's the ability to stay connected without losing your sense of self. When silence appears, this becomes the ultimate test. Not whether you feel something, but whether that feeling immediately takes over your actions, your thoughts, and your sense of stability. The moment someone becomes emotionally central to you, your reactions begin to shift. Their attention starts to influence your mood. Their silence begins to affect your peace. Without noticing, you give them a level of control that goes beyond the connection itself. This is where attachment turns into dependency. You're no longer just enjoying their presence. You're relying on it to feel balanced. And when that presence is inconsistent, your emotions follow that inconsistency. Detachment interrupts that cycle. It creates a boundary between what you feel and how you respond. You can like someone, care about them, even value the connection, but still remain grounded within yourself. Their silence doesn't immediately create panic because your emotional state isn't entirely tied to their behavior. You experience the moment without being consumed by it. That difference is subtle, but it changes everything about how you show up. Most people struggle with this because they equate holding on with caring. They believe that the more they think, analyze, and react, the more invested they are. But real emotional strength often looks like restraint. It's the ability to step back, to not chase every shift, to not attach your identity to how someone else behaves. That doesn't weaken the connection. It protects you from losing yourself within it. There's also a level of clarity that comes with detachment. When you're not overly attached, you see things more objectively. You're not filtering everything through fear of loss or the need to be chosen. You notice patterns more clearly. You recognize effort versus inconsistency, and you make decisions based on reality instead of hope. This clarity allows you to move with intention rather than desperation. Detachment also reinforces self-respect. It sends a message to yourself that your value doesn't decrease just because someone becomes distant or silent. You're not trying to hold on to something at any cost. You're allowing the connection to exist, but not at the expense of your emotional well-being. That mindset naturally changes your behavior. You stop overextending, you stop overgiving, and you stop trying to secure something that isn't stable on its own. Another important aspect is emotional independence. When you're detached in a healthy way, your happiness isn't dependent on constant interaction. You have your own focus, your own priorities, and your own sense of fulfillment. This doesn't push people away. It actually creates a stronger presence. You're engaging from a place of choice, not need. And that difference is felt in every interaction. Detachment also gives space for truth to reveal itself. When you're not interfering by chasing or overreacting, you allow the other person to show who they are naturally. If they come closer, it's genuine. If they pull away, it's clear. You're not forcing an outcome, you're observing it. And that observation keeps you aligned with reality instead of getting lost in assumptions or emotional reactions. Over time, this becomes a form of quiet strength. You're still open, still capable of connection, but you're not easily shaken. You don't lose your balance when things become uncertain. You remain steady, aware, and in control of your responses. The connection becomes something you experience, not something that defines you. And that balance is what allows you to stay whole, regardless of how anyone else chooses to show up.